I grew up knowing how to do
insurance fraud,
document
forgery, charity fraud.
I had a whole
background of fraud
before I dove into
cybercrime.
Meet Brett Johnson,
former U.S. Most Wanted cybercriminal,
known by the Secret Service as
the original Internet Godfather.
I put me in prison, nobody else did. And I chose to hurt people. Modern cybercrime. It starts with 3 websites: Counterfeit Library, Shadow Crew, Carter Planet. I ran Counterfeit Library and Shadow Crew. When I was committing crime, we knew that we were doing the wrong thing. It's almost as if our society these days has accepted that, hey, some forms of fraud are okay. The society itself is becoming broken in understanding the differences between right and wrong.
But if cybercrime were a country, it would have the 3rd largest economy on the planet.
Welcome to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. Jeff Lerner, your host. If you're seeing this on YouTube, you can tell that I am not in the studio today. I am on location from my daughter's cheer competition, hence the hotel room-esque background. But today, we are once again having amazing conversations with amazing human beings. Today, we're joined by Brett Johnson. Now, let me just say, before I read you Brett's biography, if you're a regular listener of the show, you know that I usually read the first few sentences of the standard bio, and then I get bored because I don't like reading stuff, and then I just start ad-libbing my own experience of the person. Today, I'm reading you the bio as it's written, because this is not a bio that's going to bore you or me. All right, so here it goes. This is Brett Johnson, former U.S. Most Wanted cybercriminal, now good guy. That's what it says in the bio. And by the way, I can vouch. I mean, he's got a Bama hat on right now. He just took his son on a college visit. He's a dad. He's a involved parent. He is a good guy. At least that's going to be the assumption going in here. But former United States Most Wanted Brett Johnson, once referred to by United States Secret Service as the original Internet Godfather, has been a central figure in the cybercrime world for over 20 years. Brett built and was the leader of Shadow Crew, the precursor to today's darknet markets. He was instrumental in developing many areas of online fraud while helping design, implement, and refine modern identity theft, account takeover fraud, card not present fraud, IRS tax fraud, and countless other social engineering attacks, breaches, and hacking operations. Upon his capture, the United States Secret Service hired Mr. Brett Johnson to work as a consultant and informant. Johnson worked with the Secret Service for several months before going on a cross-country crime spree, being placed on the U.S. Most Wanted list, being captured again, sent to prison, escaped prison, got captured yet again, and finally accepted responsibility for his actions. Today, Brett Johnson works as a security consultant and public speaker. He is one of the world's foremost authorities on cybercrime and identity theft. During 2017, Mr. Johnson was keynote speaker at over 30 conferences worldwide. He's been featured in the book Kingpin by Kevin Poulsen and on numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, NBC, CNN Money, Wired Magazine, Vice, RT, TV, Ars Technica, The Independent, and more. Mr. Brett Johnson, welcome to the show.
No, thank you. That is one hell of a bio, even if it is mine.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that guy. How do you feel about that guy?
I think that guy was a very slow learner, is what I think, because I had many opportunities during my life to turn things around, had people that believed in me, and it took a long time, a very long time.
So obviously, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person who, as I'm reading that, the whole Catch Me If You Can movie and concept comes to mind. Only, it's a different type of, crime, let's call it, but kind of similar vibe. And so I guess I'll go to, gosh, what are the most, I have a limited amount of time with you and way more questions than I'm going to get to ask. So it's like, where do I want to start? What is it you think you were really after during that time?
What was it that I was, so that's, geez, man, that's the question that opens up this whole can of worms, right? I mean, my life of crime did not begin with cybercrime. All right. My life of crime began when I was 10 years old. My mom was the fraudster in the family. My father was the enabler in the family. And I get the worst parts from my mom and my dad. My mom, the criminal mindset. My dad, his thing is, his primary character flaw was he didn't want to be involved. He was scared of the people that he loved, my mom, leaving him. So if she wanted to commit a crime, he would co-sign off on it. If she wanted to abuse someone, she would not step in the way. So that's where it begins. But and it begins with me shoplifting food. My mom had been leaving me and my sister home for days. We didn't have any food in the house. I was 10 years old. My sister Denise was 9. She walks in one day. She's got some pork chops in her hand. I'm like, where did you find that? She's like, I stole it. And I was like, show me how you did that. And she takes me and she shows me how she shoplifts food. And we start stealing not only food, but games and toys and clothes. And mom comes home, sees all the stuff. Where did it come from? I stand up. We found it. She's like, you didn't find that. My sister Denise stands up. We stole it. My mom looks at my sister, show me how you did that. And she starts running us as little shoplifters. So that's how my life of crime began, is at that point. And it kept going. I'm the guy that I dove headfirst into it. I didn't hesitate. I didn't pull back. I was always that fraudster. And my sister Denise was not like that. Other than that shoplifting experience, she goes off to be a parent, good teacher, good citizen overall. I was the guy that kept going on that side of the family. And I say that side of the family because it wasn't just my mom. It was every member of that side of the family that was involved in some sort of scheming. And so I grew up knowing how to do insurance fraud, document forgery, charity fraud, trafficking drugs, illegally strip mining coal. I had a whole background of fraud before I dove into cybercrime. And so that type of stuff.
How many generations did it go back?
Oh, so there was my mom, my grandfather, my grandmother, my mom's sisters. So we're talking 2. And before that, I can't say before that.
But it was multi-generational.
It was, but you have to understand that Eastern Kentucky, and I'm not trying to denigrate an entire population, but areas like Eastern Kentucky, if you're not fortunate enough to have a job, you might be involved in a scam, hustle, fraud, a come up, whatever you want to call it. And that's very common in that area. You know, it's boosted, or it used to be the coal industry was the primary economic determiner in that area. Then it became the service industry. Now I'm not sure what it was. The New York Times back in, I think, 1987, they did an article on Eastern Kentucky saying that it was the yard sale economy that boosted the economy in the area. The truth of the matter is that it's extremely poor. At one point, the area where I grew up in was the capital for OxyContin use in the United States. Now meth is going crazy in that area. You know, you've got a group of people, a population of people that they've been beaten down. They've been promised things from politicians on all sides that's never been delivered. They've been told that, you know, they're always going to be poor, promised things, everything else, and it's never panned out. And because of that, you've got people that I'm proud to be a Kentuckian. I am, because even though some of us, like me, I used to be a fraudster, but we are a hardworking, proud people, and we look out for each other, even if we are criminals. Sometimes we look out for each other. So I'm a proud Kentuckian.
Honor among thieves.
There is, and that translates to cybercrime. When I start to develop that, I got married, and like I said, I get the worst parts from my mom and my dad. My dad, that fear of the loved ones leaving me. So I told my wife when I got married, my first wife, I was like, "Hey, don't worry about working. I've got it. You know, don't worry about the cooking and the cleaning. You go to school. I've got everything." Well, I didn't have everything. My job, I was 60 hours a week on a job, 18-hour class load, cooking, cleaning, couldn't do it all. And the job gave in, and I started running these scams around Lexington, Kentucky, not doing really well until I find the internet, find eBay, and then that's where everything kind of, you know, explodes at that point in time. So, you know, if you look at the genesis of modern cybercrime, it starts with 3 websites. Those websites are Counterfeit Library, Shadow Crew, Carter Planet. I ran Counterfeit Library and Shadow Crew. A Ukrainian national, Dmitry Golubov, he built Carter Planet. But what's interesting is, and specifically with Shadow Crew, understand that cybercrime, if someone attacks you online, either as an individual or as an organization looking to get into your company or just steal your identity, it is rarely a single attacker that does that. It's often a group of individuals working together, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is, if you break down the way cybercrime operates, there are three necessities to successfully committing cybercrime. You have to gather data. That's the PII, the credentials, any tool that may be needed to launch the attack, which is the second part, committing the crime, and then finally being able to cash that crime out. Before Shadow Crew comes into play, those three necessities were still there, but if you were going to network with other criminals online, the only avenue you had to do that was IRC, Internet Relay Chat, this rolling chat board. You had no idea who you were talking to, if you could trust that individual, if they had a product or service, if they had it, if it worked, or if they were just going to rip you off, because everyone there was a crook. So Shadow Crew, before, and it's only been the past probably 3 to 4 years that on the cybersecurity side, we've seen people that are talking about trust in the environment, trust departments. Back with Shadow Crew, we understood even back then that trust was paramount. So we established this trust mechanism on Shadow Crew that still lives today on dark web marketplaces, criminal environments online. And it looks like, the way it looks like, you have a large communication channel, forum type structure, where individuals from different time zones can communicate, ask questions, learn. By looking at someone's screen name, what the skill level of that person is. That name becomes their brand, so you know their history up throughout. We had vouching systems, review systems, escrow systems, all with the purpose of establishing trust with one criminal and another so that they can work together. And that really, just that one mechanism really redefines cybercrime as we know it. There's a reason today that if cybercrime were a country, it would have the third largest economy on the planet. And that's primarily the reason, is because you're able to establish trust with these criminals when they're looking really to just make money wherever they can.
Okay, let's pause on that statement for a second. If cybercrime were a country, it would have essentially you're saying the third highest GDP of any country. So I'm assuming that's behind the US and China.
Behind the U.S. and China. So it beats the hell out of Brazil, beats the hell out of any country in Europe, the U.K., anything else like that. Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible.
Right.
Incredible as in hard to believe. Like,
yeah.
Strains credibility, right?
Right. But but if you look at it, so think of it like this. Talking numbers. Shadow Crew gets shut down by law enforcement October 26, 2004. We ended with 4,000 members at that point in time. Now, fast forward to 2017, the largest criminal network is called Alpha Bay. Law enforcement shuts it down, ends with 240,000 members. That's 2017. 2 more years later, just a dark web marketplace called Black Market gets shut down, 1.15 million members, all of that pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, what happened? Well, the government put out stimulus programs with absolutely no security in place whatsoever for 6 months. So fraud exploded. At the same time, you've got, it's almost this trickle down type of fraud that, or mindset that's coming through. You've got corporations, you've got politicians that common citizens every single day see that they're committing some sort of fraud and they're getting away with it. So that's going on. You've got cybercrime that has evolved to the point where it's basically cybercrime as a service. Attackers don't need to know really anything in order to be successful. They buy off-the-shelf products, services, information. So all that together equates to this thing of cybercrime having the third largest economy on the planet.
So I'm going to share my total experience with cybercrime.
Sure.
Because I think it could be a starting point for like how to call them normal, civilian people that aren't in this world. Like how do we start to peel away the layers and really understand this and then, potentially learn something from it. Sure. Right. So I had at one, I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but then again, everything you've admitted to is far more embarrassing than anything I'm about to admit to. Depending on your point of view, I guess. But
right.
although maybe I should just be embarrassed that like I didn't think as big as you did, but I had this guy, there was somebody online who was an affiliate marketer
Okay.
who was basically publishing slander about me.
Oh, wow.
Because I run a pretty big online education platform. And so he was trying to essentially make publish what was basically just trying to redirect my online, profile or online brand reputation, people looking up me, and he was going to draw them into his articles that were slanderous and say like, don't buy his stuff, buy my stuff instead, basically.
Sure.
So he was an affiliate marketer using what we call like negative advertising.
Right.
And he was based, I had attempted all legal remedies. He was based offshore. I don't want to say where he operated because that might be a clue to who he was, but it was outside of any jurisdiction I could realistically get to. And I got a VPN, and I like read a blog post on how to access the dark web. And I went on the dark web, and I'm like trying to talk to, in these forums like you're describing, like what would it take to take down this guy's website? Because he's lying about me and I have no legal recourse, right? And everywhere I turned, I'm like, okay, I have no idea who I'm talking to. They can totally tell that I'm ignorant and probably unprotected and vulnerable. The last thing I want to do is put myself on their radar.
Sure.
I have no idea. I'm probably being watched right now just because I'm even on the dark web. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. They want to get paid in Bitcoin. They want to get paid up front. I am so in over my head. First of all, I was half joking even looking into this. Like, I don't know if I'm even the guy that would pull the trigger if I could find so I was like, I'm out, shut it down. And I just ran away. And that was my flirtation with cybercrime, right?
That's probably good. They would have probably ripped you off.
That's what I'm thinking is like, they might have taken the guy's website down, and then I might have woken up with like my Schwab account was empty or something.
Right. And honestly, it was probably just a scheme to get you to pay them, and then they're not going to do anything. You do have some vendors on the dark web and some surface web groups and Telegram that can do things like get Facebook accounts shut down or Instagram accounts shut down and taken over. You've got that, but that's not very common at all. It's more common you'll have someone advertise that, and then they'll just rip the person off that pays them.
Okay. So like, I do remember having read, that actually the dark web is, and there's the dark web, and then there's the, what do they call it? What's the layer of the web that's like, it's behind firewalls. It's not considered dark. It's just what's it called?
So you've got the surface web, which is anything that Google can find, really 4 to 5% of the internet. You've got the deep web, which is what you're talking about. That's anything, but that's behind a paywall, anything that doesn't have an internet address. So bank statements, emails, Netflix, things like that. And then inside of the deep web, you've got the dark web, accessible by the Tor browser. Now, how big is that? Well, we don't really know. We think some estimates show maybe 15%, so 3 times the size of anything that's, accessible via Google.
So this is like millions of people. And maybe the audience is like, yeah, Jeff, this is common knowledge. But I mean, I'm a pretty astute person that spends his life in, it's out there in the world trying to learn, and it's all somewhat foreign to me. So I don't know. I hope I'm not as ignorant as maybe I fear that I am.
No,
but
not at all.
But there's a layer that you're saying is potentially 3 times bigger than what I think of as the internet, where everybody's operating through these really long URLs that are just random hashes or numbers or whatnot on Tor browsers. I think the one I used was called Onion.
Right.
Onion something. And all with like server, VPN, like server cloaking, so nobody can figure out where everybody is. And there's this layer. Is that where you're saying that basically the economy of that layer is like the 3rd largest GDP in the world?
Well, sort of. So think of it like this. Okay, so some background on the dark web. The Tor browser, called the Onion router, was developed by the United States Navy. And they did that so that intelligence operatives could communicate with each other without being identified by their foreign adversaries. Okay? So over time, the Tor browser, the Navy decides we're going to let it go open source. And they did that for a couple of reasons as well. First, for whistleblowers. The second, for that any citizen that was behind another country's firewall, China, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, what have you, so that that individual could get around that firewall and get real information or get real information out at the same time. So it goes open source. But the problem is, and I think that the military didn't understand this or appreciate that, the first adoptees to a technology, if that technology can be used to remain somewhat anonymous or to launder money, the first adoptees tend to be criminals. Right. So that's exactly what happened. They didn't call it the dark web back then. They didn't call it the dark web until you started to see all of this criminal activity that started to pop up on that, because if you use it properly, you can be fairly anonymous on that, okay? Then they find out, well, not only can we communicate with each other on the dark web, but we could also build websites on the dark web, all right? So that's where it comes from. Now, I don't want to give a false impression by saying that everyone who uses the Tor browser is a criminal. That's not true. You have tons of websites that are legitimate. You have the New York Times has one, Library of Congress has one. There's tons of different websites on the dark web that you can access that are legitimate. But the dark web has a very important place in cybercrime. So think of it like this. If I'm looking to steal a laptop through Apple's online website, all right, what I'll do is I'll go down to the dark web, I'll buy stolen credit card details or someone's personal information or bank account information, what have you. And then once I get that on the dark web, I'll travel back to the surface web to commit that crime. So all crime doesn't just take place on the dark web. Think of the dark web as the information gathering, the place where people go in order to find out how to commit these crimes or to network.
It's like the back alleys.
That's exactly what it is. But the interesting thing, now that used to be the way it is. The problem, though, is that the traditional dark web has a lot of friction. So for those who don't know what friction is the user experience. Anything that pops up that interrupts that user experience on a website is called friction. So a login, CAPTCHAs, anything like that is friction. The dark web has a lot of friction. You have to download the browser. You have to configure the browser properly, or law enforcement is going to find out who you are. You have to know the website you're going to, because there's no search engine for the dark web. You have to watch out for other criminals who are looking to fish you out through fake links.
And by the way, the website you want to go to is not going to be called like darkweb.net. It's going to be like 37 random digits that you've got, either got to have on a Post-it note or some way to keep track of it.
Right. And it's going to end with a .onion. There's no way to guess it or search for it. So you have to rely on things like Reddit or dark.fil, things like that to try to find these websites. So it's got a lot of friction. Because of that, we see now that Telegram is really the Wild West of cybercrime. And there's a reason for that. And that reason is Telegram is almost friction-free. It's an app on your phone. You can use it through a browser. It's got a keyword search function built into it. You can build channels very easily. It's encrypted end-to-end. And the owner is a Russian who absolutely does not respond to any request from law enforcement. So that means that you get a lot of criminals that all of a sudden are flocking there because it's easier to use.
So I think, I mean, there's the call it the technical interest, which as a bit of a dilettante in technical matters, I think I could really geek out with you on like how it works.
Sure.
But I think it's probably more interesting to get into why it works, or why it is, like the being and the what do we learn about it. So I think it's just so fascinating to me that you think about like the headlines of today and, you know, the zeitgeist of the world, and it's all the stuff that's talked about in the open about what's in the open. And then there's this other thing that's so much bigger, and it's buried and it's in the shadows. But I mean, there are right now millions of people who are in this layer of the world that we don't even see, and there's no record of any of it, right? Like there's no Alexa that tells you, I say Alexa, most people think of Amazon's, but you know what I mean? Alexa, the ranking of the websites, and like there's no breadcrumb trail that really gives us a lot of information about this, but there are currently millions of people that are in this, call it a shadow world right now, doing nefarious things, or maybe not only nefarious things, to your point, but for some reason they want to operate secretly.
Right. And understand that these people are not working solo. That's one of the main important things to understand, that it's not someone who is simply on their own that's committing these crimes. They're relying on the platforms and those individuals that are members of those platforms to learn how to commit crimes, to learn which tools to use, to learn which websites or targets are easier to hit, to learn the new trends that are coming up. I mean, everything across the board is what happens. So you've got, think of these environments as real-time exchanges of information, because that's exactly what they are. And that information being exchanged is how to victimize you or an organization that you may be part of.
So what's interesting to me is, I mean, the kindling for this layer of the world is obviously disenfranchised people who feel, and maybe this is a referential question to you as one who was an early progenitor of this. Like, sure. You talked about, I mean, the dark web or shadow crew or whatnot existed in the digital world because places like Eastern Kentucky exist in the physical world. And one begets the other, where people feel like institutional promises have been broken, the upward mobility of the American dream or the Western economy or whatever it is, that is for some reason not available to them, that they've been cast off, they've been forgotten about, nobody cares. Like, there's a disenfranchisement that has to happen as a precursor to people reorganizing themselves in the shadows to be disruptive.
I would agree to a point, point on that. I think that there's a demographic that absolutely does feel disenfranchised. I agree with that, all right? But there's also a demographic that finds it exciting, that finds it very romantic, that boosts their ego. For example, this past year, I was very fortunate working with the FBI that I was part of arresting over 300 people from Telegram, all right? And what we found out, the demographic of many of those users, they were not disenfranchised. They came from very good homes, very well-to-do homes. It was just something that excited them. And
so they were bored.
Good at it.
They were just bored. Yeah.
Right. And so you've got that. You've got the people who are disenfranchised, but you've also got another group of people that it's weird. When I was committing crime, we knew that we were doing the wrong thing. All right. We had no doubt that we were committing crime. What's interesting to me is it's almost as if our society these days has accepted that, hey, some forms of fraud are okay. And they send that message to CEOs, they send that message to CISOs, politicians, and people on Telegram and the dark web as well. So it's as if the society itself is becoming broken in understanding the differences between right and wrong.
So are you saying that society thinks, or some elements of society think, that fraud is okay because it's part of like some sort of cultural or political resistance?
I think not only that,
okay,
but I really think if you take someone like, I reference Eastern Kentucky, okay? So, but it's not just Eastern Kentucky. I used to live in Charleston, South Carolina, and law enforcement in Charleston, South Carolina, they were very good about making sure that crime stayed in specific areas, specific ethnic areas, all right? So if you're in one of those areas and, the life that you grow up in is slinging dope on a corner someplace, and you've got very little prospect of getting out of that area, of doing any better at all, then maybe you might look for a come up online. And because of that, do you really think that you're doing anything wrong when all of your peers, your neighborhood, that society that you live in, that little micro society that you live in, is telling you that, hey, yeah, you can do that. You got to come out of this some way. And we see stories like that, right? We see people like 50 Cent. We see people like Jay-Z that led lives of crime, but they were able to come out of that through crime. So I think that sends a message to a lot of people of, hey, yeah, I need to do this in order to come up. I call it cognitive dissonance, which is what it is. But I think that internet crime is very interesting because you don't have to see the damage and the harm that you're causing your victims. It allows you to just look at the crime that you're perpetrating as a data-driven crime, that you're not really harming anyone. You're just stealing information and using that. That could be the farthest thing from the truth. You always have a victim, and as a criminal, you are always actively choosing to victimize someone.
Somebody's mother or father or son or daughter. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So it's almost like, I mean, I was fortunate. I was raised by parents who instilled good foundational values, thou shalt nots and thou shalts, so to speak.
So you had a very good moral compass instilled in you.
Yeah, that I still kicked against repeatedly in my life until eventually I was like, okay, the way I want to feel seems to manifest more often in alignment with making choices that go with these morals, rather than when I reject them, I tend to feel in a way I don't want to feel over time. So
sure,
I came to that, but yeah, I mean, you're saying that for some groups, maybe for yourself too, there's almost like a upward mobility of like, well, my homies are just robbing liquor stores, but I've graduated to the real show. I'm doing this stuff on the internet now.
Well, I think that's an important thing to consider. I mean, you do have, and I served a lot of prison time, and in prison, I saw this time and time again of people who were disenfranchised, that were disillusioned at the same time, and they really felt that the only avenue that they had was to continue to commit crime or to engage in criminal activity. How do you fix that? I really don't know.
It's systemic.
I mean, it is. Yeah, it's systemic.
I have a good friend that says, actually, formerly, sadly, we had a falling out, but
okay.
He used to always say, back when we were hanging out, that you can't judge a man's character entirely based on what he does. You have to also know what options he thought he had at the time.
Right.
That really is a powerful idea to me.
It is, but I think it goes even further than that. I was very fortunate that my father, he passed away in October, but the last year of his life, I was very fortunate that I was able to move in with me and finally get to know the man. And I found out, the big lesson I learned from my father and his passing away is that we all have the capacity for good and bad actions. I don't think there's any such thing as a good person or a bad person. There's just a person, and it depends on what they're doing as to how we define that person. My dad, at the end of the day, I think he ended up more good than bad, but he absolutely had the capacity for bad actions, and he did that. Me, I don't call myself a good guy. In the bio, it says good guy. I still don't think I'm a good guy. I think I'm
you're better than you were.
Right. That's what I think.
So this is interesting. So you mentioned, how much time did you spend in prison?
Got sentenced to 7.5 years, served right at 7 total.
7 years. Okay. I'll share.
Sure.
Again, I feel like you show me yours and then I show you my tiny little attempt to, relate.
Right.
I've never been in prison, never been a cyber criminal.
Okay.
But I did, like I said, I flirted on the dark web once, and I did actually speak. The other day, I was invited by a friend who himself spent time in prison and got out of prison through a class that's actually a Stephen Covey, like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. They have a class called the 7 Habits class that has a pretty amazing track record of helping prisoners. They go through the class, they start working on the 7 habits and Covey's principles around character and building character. And it's got a track record for helping people get granted parole and get out and get, suspended sentences and whatnot. anyway, I was invited to speak at the graduation of a 7 Habits program that for parolees.
Okay.
And it was really cool. It was just a cool experience. But one of the speakers there, a number of the speakers had been inmates, one in particular, but it was kind of some of the same themes as what we're talking about, where he said, there's these rehabilitation elements that they try to bring into correctional system, but that fundamentally, and you hear about people going into the prison and they get their high school, they finally get their GED, and maybe they get a college degree, and maybe they get a master's, and maybe they get all these certifications and whatnot. He said, but what they fundamentally, what was different about this program was that it taught character.
Right.
And I didn't have a chance to get into a deep conversation with the guy, but what I really wanted to ask him was like if somebody teaches you engineering, you then internalize the way of thinking and the way decisions are made and problems are solved based on the principles of engineering.
Sure.
But character's different. You don't develop character just by learning about character.
Right.
You kind of have to have experiences, and something has to shift internally that probably transcends human teaching in a sense. So what is it? Maybe I'm getting a do-over. I get to ask you the questions I didn't get to ask him, but
sure.
What does it look like, or how does that work where character starts to, let's say, blossom in a person, where it's just because I can do bad things, I don't want to do them anymore.
So I think there's a few things that are going on talking about recidivism or rehabilitation. The first, I'm very fortunate these days. I get to talk to not only victims and try to assist there, but I also get to talk to current criminals and former criminals. One of the things that's interesting is as someone gets older, the recidivism rates drop. Specifically, if you reach 41 years of age, it drops by a good 30 to 40%, and it lowers every single year. It gets even better than that the older you get. There's this term called criminal menopause, and they applied that. It comes into play with this gentleman by the name of Ted Durbin, who served 28 years in Angola. But criminal menopause is it's very simple. It's the criminal gets so old that they decide that they're no longer going to commit crime. That leaves them at that point. As far as building character, I didn't take that program that you were talking about, but I was fortunate enough to take the residential drug abuse program. I'm not a drug user, but I lied to get the program because that is the only time that you get off in federal prison. The interesting thing is that drug program was not about drugs. It was about cognitive behavioral therapy. It taught you that your thoughts determine your feelings determine your actions. If you change the thought process, at the end of the day, the actions will change as well. Now, how do you teach that? You can teach it. You can tell what the principles are on it and drill it into people's heads and have it, a peer type of campaign. This is what it is in prison that lasts 9 months, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can do that as much as you want. But I would say that unless a criminal, chooses to adopt that and live that type of life, that it's useless at the end of the day. I think that's a very simple type of program, and it's very easy to tear that apart. But I've adopted that. I live my life by that, and it makes a lot of difference. I would say the same thing comes into play when we're talking about building or training what character should be. Yeah, you can train it, but at the end of the day, for it to really make a difference, for it to really take hold, that person has to choose to live their life like that. And that becomes very difficult when we're talking about inmates because, especially in the United States, you leave prison with the exact same tool set with which you enter. Not only that, but you leave prison and you go back to the people, places, and things that you were associated with before you went to prison. Getting a job, you're probably going to have a lot of difficulty doing that. There's a big reason that most inmates who are successful post-release, they run their own business.
Right.
we tend to have a lot of problems with authority, but it gets worse than that. We have a lot of problems getting a job because of our criminal histories. We're hard workers. You hear a lot of people say that, people who commit crime, it's easy to do. They're lazy. No, they're not. Most of them are not. When I was committing crime, it was 16 hours a day on a computer, working my ass off. The people that I knew who trafficked drugs every day, all day. There's a reason it's called a criminal lifestyle. It's not a 9 to 5 job. It's a 24-hour-a-day job. So you're not lazy doing that. And if you can find some way to make a living legitimately, you tend to work your ass off doing that. Like I wake up every single morning working and go to sleep every single night still working. It's very common for criminals to do that. My thing is I say that you have to make the active decision to change your life, not only to change your life, but to understand that, hey, you can't have two masters. You can't be planning on, living a legal life while you're still dabbling in whatever criminal activities you used to be doing. You've got to commit. So that it takes that, but it also takes a support group of people who are there for you to call you out on any type of bullshit you may be doing, but also to assist you, who believe in you, who keep, giving you that support that you need to do the right thing at the end of the day. I think it takes a combination of both those things. And I think it becomes very hard for many felons to do that.
So do you think that it ultimately comes down to just incentives where it's like, I reached a point where the incentive to be a criminal wasn't worth it anymore because the cost was too high? Or do you think it was more of call it like a true moral shift?
I think it can be both. With me, it was a moral shift. And the reason I say with me, with the emphasis, is because a lot of former criminals that I talk to today, I'm firmly convinced that they'll never break the law again. But I'm also firmly convinced that they are not the least bit contrite about any crime that they committed. Right. All right. They've simply got a good job now. They're solid in their community as far as that goes, and they're not going to break the law anymore. Okay, I'm fine with that. But contrition to me is a very important aspect of turning your life around. If you are not feeling bad about victimizing people in your former life, there's something wrong with you.
Hey there, it's Jeff. So real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. I use text messages to provide unique value to the Unlock Your Potential community. These texts could just be random thoughts. It could be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning, maybe giving an update on a special I'm running or some free training that I host for my community. Anyway, just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that is 702-996-3926. Let's get back to the podcast.
And so when you were doing it, did you feel bad?
No, not at all. Not at all.
And then so that's the shift I'm looking for, is when did the feeling bad kick in, and what was that? Because honestly, if we could bottle that, we could do a lot of good in the world.
So with me, and again, at the top of the recording, I told you it was a long trip. I was given opportunity upon opportunity. With me, it was, I needed to be taken off the street. I needed to go to prison, absolutely. But also my sister had disowned me at one point. When I get out of prison, my wife now, Michelle, she shows me exactly what a healthy relationship is supposed to be. And then finally, the FBI gives me validation. This agent comes in, he takes me in under his wing, gives me references, advice. And then when I go over to the cybersecurity community as a whole, they were very welcoming and open. So all those things that together comes into play. And the reason I cite prison as a necessity, you've got a lot of time to think in prison. Mm-hmm. And, you can spend your time watching TV if you want to, or working out, or avoiding the crimes that you committed, or you can spend a lot of time thinking. And I was the guy who spent a lot of time thinking about it. It took me about 2.5 years to finally accept responsibility, to understand that, no, I put me in prison. Nobody else did. And I chose to hurt people. It wasn't I did these crimes for my wife or my stripper girlfriend. I committed crimes because I chose to. I victimized people because I chose to. And here's the thing. I fully believe that if someone really, I mean, really accepts responsibility to understand that, hey, the reason that I have this lot in life is because of every choice that I've made has led to this point. If you really believe that and accept that, I really believe that that precipitates change. You can't really understand that you're the fault of everything that's happened to you and not change at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I like this idea that it sounds like part of it, at least, is you have to be put in an environment or be shown evidence in the form of other people in, forming some sort of like pseudo community that like, hey, this is, and you mentioned even your wife, like, this is what a healthy relationship feels like. So you can feel, oh, I see the incentive of participating in healthy reciprocity, not rather than, predatory reciprocity.
Right.
Or this is what it feels like when a group of people actually trusts me. And I hold myself to a standard of being worthy of that trust. There's a positive feeling associated with that. But is it true to say that like up to that point in your life, you simply had not been exposed to those feelings? You've not been put in environments that produce them?
And that's what I mentioned to you. You grew up in a family who instilled a very good moral compass.
Right.
I grew up in a family where the moral compass was very situational. All right. And I still, and to be fair, I don't refer to myself as a reformed criminal. I refer to myself today as a criminal. I'm simply a criminal who chooses not to commit crime because I've still got that mindset. Yeah. I've still got that situational moral compass. I know what's the right thing, but I've still that compass veers, and I have to be very careful to say, no, don't do that. And the reason, and it helps with me. I was historically the guy. I never bowed into peer pressure. I never belonged to any cliques or groups. I typically started my own. Mm-hmm. And again, problems with authority. When I turned my life around, at that point, I kind of submit to the idea of peer pressure because I had a lot of people that people that were professionals in cybersecurity and law enforcement. They took a chance on me. They put their careers on the line to give somebody who they had really no idea if I was going to do the right thing or not. But they gave me that chance. And because of that, those peers now, I feel kind of ingrained to that, it's important that I'm part of this group and that I show them that, yes, you can trust me. Yes, you gave me that chance and I'm making the most of that. You mentioned that, I forgot how you said it, but I lead a blessed life today. And I say this all the time, but I mean that. I lead a very blessed life that I truly do not think I deserve. I truly do not. But I'm damn grateful to have it, and I don't take it for granted, and I make the most of every single moment of it that I can, not to make amends, because I don't think you can make amends for your past actions. But I do think that maybe by God, you can level out the scale at the end of the day. And that's what I try to do.
I'll share with you a moment I had not too long ago when you talk about leveling out the scale. I think we think a lot, I'm sure, I think all of us do think in terms of like the afterlife or eternity or heaven or hell. Or what, I don't know if that's a binary or a spectrum or what, but what I thought about was if I stripped away my five senses, think about subtracting senses one at a time, starting with sort of like, call them like the two least impactful, which are probably smell and taste, right?
Sure.
Start by stripping those away. Then strip away touch, then strip away sound, then strip away sight. Then what are you experiencing? All you're experiencing is actually how you feel at that point.
Right.
And then snapshot that feeling and be stuck with it forever. That's heaven or hell.
Amen. Amen.
Like
I'd
if
agree
I
with that.
die and my physical body shuts down, what I know is that I'm going to lose my five senses. I know that there's this inexplicable thing called consciousness that because I don't know in what form it exists, I cannot conceptualize in what form it would be destroyed. I just know that it's no longer housed in a functioning body at that point. Therefore, I don't know where it goes or if, what happens. But presumably the best conception I can come up with of an afterlife is to have all my physical senses stripped away and simply be stuck with a feeling for eternity.
Right.
And that feeling is probably going to have a lot to do with that scale that you described.
I agree. I agree
In my
completely.
core, I know that I was a net taker from this world. There's an emotional or a consequence of that at the level of consciousness times infinite time equals hell.
Right.
Right. And so anyway, I just wanted to share, that's kind of where I've come to these things is like, I want that scale. I want to tip that scale to the positive so badly because I have no way to know that I'm not going to be stuck with how I feel about myself forever at some point.
And that goes into a lot of my my current belief structure. And I was mentioning this yesterday to my wife. I recorded a show yesterday talking about the same thing. I really believe, and this is weird for a guy who was a criminal for decades,
Right.
but I really believe that we're here for two primary reasons. We're here to know ourselves better. We're here to help our fellow human being. And I also think that when we get here, that for each one of us in a very unique way, we have some sort of trial and tribulation that we have to work through in our lives, whatever that may be. And if we can do that, then maybe we're okay at the end of the day. And if not, I'm not sure how that ends up. I don't believe really in the concept of an eternal hell. I do think that if you can't do that in your life, end up that way, that something's going to go awry. I don't know if it's punishment. I don't know if it's coming back. I do think that, if you subscribe to the Christian theology of hell, I don't believe that hell is an eternal place. Augustine didn't believe that either. But I just think that, I led a life of not knowing myself, of lying to everyone, including myself, of hurting my fellow human being. And, I look back now and I look at the people like I'm very fortunate. I get to talk at Quantico every now and then. And I see agents there who, cadets who have given up very lucrative careers and prospects to simply go into law enforcement because they want to help, not hurt. And when you see groups of people that are doing that or individuals who are doing that, and I look back at my life of not doing that, that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
It really is. And I spend a lot of time these days trying to be better than I was. I wake up every single day and I try to be a better person than I was the day before. I don't commit crime anymore. I'm very fortunate that I get to help a lot of people. A lot of people I don't get to help. It tends to be that if someone's a victim of cybercrime, I tend to be the guy that gets to tell them that you're not getting your money back, and probably the person who victimized you is never going to be arrested. But someone has to tell them that, and I guess that's my lot in life for a lot of this stuff. But I try, man. I try really hard every day to do the right damn thing.
Do you associate some sort of karma with that lot, as you put it?
No, I don't think that, the people who are victimized, I don't think that they've done anything to deserve that at all.
No, I mean for you.
Oh,
having
absolutely.
to spend your life as the guy that has to tell them.
Yeah, absolutely. Being the guy who used to either steal money from them myself or train people to steal money from other people, absolutely, that's my lot in life, to sit down and talk to that victim, let them. And I do this, however long it takes. Will you talk to me on the phone? I get people reach out to me on LinkedIn or email, something like that, and they've been ripped off. And let's sit down and have a talk, and we'll talk. And if it's 10 minutes, that's great. If it's an hour and a half, 2 hours, that's exactly what it takes. And a lot of these people, they simply want someone to talk to validate what they've went through. And I absolutely believe that that's part of my lot in life to do that. And then to be honest with them of, hey, I'm sorry about this.
Well, and I mean, loving them and holding empathy and space
Yeah.
for them it's what you can do to
Yeah.
rebalance the scales. So I know we're out of time. If you'll
Sure.
permit me one more question.
Absolutely.
You said something earlier that I think is perhaps a really instructive and like useful place to double click on criminality for all of us. You said there's some people that are doing it. You actually said some people romanticize it.
Right.
And you also said that when there's a new technology, very often the early adopters are the criminals.
Right.
So there is something, and we can all relate to this. I think if we're all honest, we get it. Like there is something, we watch movies like Ocean's 11 and like, the heist guys and Usual Suspects. Like there's something like alluring about it. I think that when in particular, the part where they're early adopters of new technology, there is something very free about the criminal mind.
Sure.
In the sense of I'm not worrying, I'm not encumbered by what people think. I'm not operating from some of the normative types of self-consciousness that seem to grip a lot of people. Like I've untethered myself from society's expectations and I just color outside the lines. I think these are sort of like romantic ideals that in a lot of ways we glorify as a society. Like, I want to be the athlete that doesn't have to abide by, or celebrity that doesn't have to abide by social norms, or I want to be the entrepreneur that has $1 billion exit that doesn't have to clock in every day and deal with a boss. What is it that you think that people can learn from criminals, or what are the parts of criminality that you think speak to deep human longing that maybe if people were more intentional about fulfilling for themselves, they wouldn't be tempted by vices so much? Sure. Because their life as it was or as it is would be more complete. Do you get the question?
I get it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a deep question. My thought on that, as you're talking about that, we live in a world where as soon as a child is born, John Lennon sang about this with Working Class Hero. So we live in a world where children at a very young age are institutionalized and put into cookie cutter molds. They're done. It happens at school. It happens at church. It happens with their parents. And really, I think that a lot of criminals, self-included to a degree, I think a lot of us are not trying, we do break out of that mold.
Right.
We refuse to be that cookie cutter or just molded in the same vein as every other student or every
Anthony Burgess called it a clockwork orange.
That's it. Yeah. All right. Now, I think the issue is that when we do that, we also do it in a very unhealthy, toxic way where we bring harm to other people. And then we justify that harm in however we need to justify it. Well, I had to do it for my family, or, they can afford it. I'm just stealing from the government, whatever the justification is. What I would say, and we see these campaigns pop up fairly frequently, of letting a child be an individual. Let them, if you tell one to paint a flower or draw a flower and they draw something that doesn't even look like a flower, to them, that's okay. Let them friggin' do that. Don't force them into these routes or molds that you think they need to be into. Let that child grow and develop as a unique individual. And I think if we were able to do that more, while at the same time trying to instill that moral compass. And the thing is, I don't really care if someone believes in the Bible or the Quran or what have you. You don't have to believe in those texts in order to get truth out of those texts, but also moral guidance out of those texts. That the power of myth, to quote Joseph Campbell, the power of myth is something that is increasingly missing in our lives, and it used to be very important. We have to get back to this idea of letting people be unique, but also instilling that very solid moral compass so that you can have unique people that are different, that do break out of the molds, but at the same time, these unique people do not victimize or cause harm toward other people as well. That's my thought on that.
Yeah. So for everyone, there's that notion of your vice or your escapism or your dalliance in something that you maybe don't feel great about is at some level probably a grasp to validate your individualism inside a life, coming from within a life in which you feel suppressed or constrained in some way.
I think that's got a lot to do with it. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So I love that. As you were speaking, I was like, the mantra here is like, live as free as possible, but do no harm.
Right. Do no harm. That should be
kind of reminds me of my rights end and yours begin where my fist contacts your face.
Right. Exactly.
Like Oliver Wendell Holmes said that.
Exactly.
Okay. Man, this has been a really, really incredible conversation.
Dude, you're outstanding, truly.
Grateful, Brett. I really appreciate it. How can the world go get more of your goodness, whether it's your insights, your services, your story?
If anyone has any problems at all, find me on LinkedIn. If you're a company, I charge you money. If you're an individual just wanting to talk, got problems, whatever, find me on LinkedIn. Happy to have a talk with you. I've got 2 shows. I've got Criminal Thoughts with Brett Johnson on YouTube and on podcast platforms. That deals with crime. I've got the Brett Johnson Show. And the Brett Johnson Show recently has been, it's kind of morphed into how to become a better person. I have different topics on there, but I talk a lot about this journey of mine of trying to be healthy, of trying to be a good person, and the trials and tribulations of that, the difficulties of that. So please tune into both. I would really appreciate that. You might not like them, you might. So I don't know, but it's important to me. I want to thank you truly. I didn't know what to expect on this podcast, but the questions that you've asked, the things that we've talked about, it means a lot to me. It means you have no idea how much I appreciate you bringing me on, truly.
Oh, thanks, Brett. Yeah, it's been wonderful. I know the audience has been riveted, as have I. And while you've been a great guest, I do tell my audience every time that you, audience, are the best part of this show. You're why I do what I do every single day. And I'm so grateful we got to spend this time together. Catch you next time. If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
What Hollywood does to portray CIA officers is completely wrong. We learn how to hurt people. We learn how to steal. We learn how to break in and break out of locations. But the most dangerous part of being a spy is actually everyday life.